The Wall Street Journal notes that the front line between Russia and Ukraine is practically coming to a standstill. And this is connected to the rapid development of drone technology being used on the front. It can be said that the technological breakthrough, which the former commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, General Valery Zaluzhny, spoke about at the very beginning of the large-scale war between Russia and Ukraine, has indeed happened, but it has happened on both sides. But at the same time, it should be understood that the biggest problems with the development of drone technology are currently on the Russian side, because they are the ones on the offensive. Previously, the Russians were able to seize significant areas of Ukrainian territory through tank assaults and the advance of military equipment. Now, drones have effectively made such advances impossible because they can destroy not only columns of Russian Federation military equipment, but even individual Russian soldiers. This relatively inexpensive technology makes it possible to operate in exactly this way. Drones are being used more and more seriously to carry out a wide variety of combat missions and are creating a blind line at the front. And that's why it's important to realize what the Russian president is doing in response to this development in drone technology. The first thing is strikes on Ukrainian cities and towns. These strikes are aimed at accomplishing two objectives. The first is to destroy Ukraine's capabilities to produce drones and other military equipment. After all, there is a certain logic to this. The fewer drones the Ukrainian army has in its arsenal, the more opportunities the Russian army will have to seize another part of Ukrainian territory using conventional military equipment. So Russian strikes on Ukraine's military-industrial complex are an important task for Russia's survival in its offensive war. The second motive is, of course, aerial terror against the Ukrainian civilian population. The attempt to convince Ukrainians that only unconditional surrender to the Russian Federation will give them a chance to live, at least in relative peace, for the coming decades. And here we immediately arrive at the second important goal of the Russian president and his closest circle. The attempt to gain territories that are currently impossible to conquer using conventional military means by political means instead. That is, if the front line has effectively frozen now, it leaves the Russian president with no hope that he will be able to capture the entire territory of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia region. He hopes to gain control over these territories, which were previously annexed by the Russian Federation and incorporated into the Russian constitution within the administrative borders of these Ukrainian regions through a political solution. That is, for example, so that a ceasefire on the Russian-Ukrainian front would be accompanied by Ukraine relinquishing these territories and withdrawing Ukrainian troops from the territories of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions. The Russian leader may also hope that such a decision by the Ukrainian leadership, which could be made under pressure from Western allies as Putin hopes, will lead to significant destabilization within Ukrainian society itself, and in the future make it easier to seize new Ukrainian regions. After all, in order to continue actions aimed at further occupying Ukraine, Putin needs the destabilization of Ukrainian statehood and the absence of an army capable of countering his expansionist plan. If there are no servicemen, there are no drones either, because someone has to operate the drones. And the next goal of the Russian president stems directly from this objective. The political decisions that are supposed to lead to agreements on a ceasefire on the Russian-Ukrainian front are intended to result in the destabilization of Ukrainian statehood. And if this destabilization does not lead to the collapse of Ukraine, it should at least create conditions for the victory of pro-Russian, or at the very least anti-Ukrainian forces in the upcoming presidential and parliamentary elections in our country. Putin would like to see populists come to power who would allow the Russian Orthodox Church to strengthen its influence on Ukrainian soil and grant special status to the Russian language, thereby creating conditions for further Russian civilizational influence on Ukrainian lands after the end of military actions. Ukraine, which could not be defeated by war, is to be conquered by the Russians through peaceful destabilizing actions, using those who believe that coexisting with Russia, attending churches convenient for themselves, and speaking the language most comfortable for them would be a normal way of life in a destabilized and economically weakened country. And another quite important point is the work of Russian propaganda, the Kremlin's powerful weapon both in the world and within Ukraine itself. Special information tools created by Moscow are used for this successful operation. For example, such as the Telegram Messenger, which serves as a news source for the vast majority of Ukrainian citizens and turns this majority into instruments of propaganda and informational influence by the Russian political leadership and its henchmen. And within the framework of this propaganda, both in Ukraine itself and in the West, fakes will be spread about the imminent collapse of Ukrainian statehood, a victorious offensive by the armed forces of Ukraine, conflicts between Ukrainian society and the authorities, with an emphasis on authoritarian tendencies in the actions of the Ukrainian government itself and its unquestionable authoritarianism. This is also an important part which is meant to substitute for what is not actually happening, the advance of the Russian army on Ukrainian position. And if we understand how the Russian leader is trying in this way to compensate for the impossibility of a Russian offensive and the capture of new Ukrainian regions in the further course of the war, we can at least realize how it is possible to resist Russia and how Putin can be stopped in the 2020s and 2030s of this century years of inevitable Russian-Ukrainian confrontation, which will continue even if the hot phase of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, which since February 2022 we have come to call the Great War, comes to an end. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, follow my social media and my channels on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee and Donatello, which help support and develop these resources. Make use of the sponsorship feature right here on YouTube. Wishing you victory and peace. Good luck.